The first time my parrot quoted HOA parking regulations directly into Karen's face during a neighborhood meeting, I honestly thought she might faint. But none of that would have happened if she had simply stopped reporting my bird to the HOA every single week. Instead, she turned a harmless talking parrot into the most feared resident in the entire neighborhood. And somehow, my bird ended up knowing the HOA bylaws better than the actual board members. My name is Trevor Blake, and I own an African gray parrot named Winston. Now, if you know anything about African greys, then you already know they are ridiculously smart. Winston did not just repeat words randomly. He copied sounds, remembered conversations, and somehow understood timing better than most people. I'd owned him for almost 11 years, and honestly, he was calmer and more polite than half the neighbors living in our HOA community. Most people loved him. Kids stopped outside during walks hoping Winston would say hello from the screened front porch. Delivery drivers laughed whenever he greeted them with, "Good morning, buddy." Even older neighbors enjoyed hearing him mimic phones, car alarms, and sometimes my laugh perfectly. Then Karen moved in next door. Her real name was Denise Holloway. But within 2 weeks, the entire neighborhood started calling her Karen. Behind closed doors, Denise complained about everything: grass height, mailbox colors, garbage cans, parked cars, wind chimes, dogs, children bikes, and somehow even birds. Especially birds. The problem started the first morning. Winston accidentally copied a phrase he heard from a construction worker repairing the road nearby. Nothing extreme, just a mildly rude phrase shouted at 6 in the morning. Unfortunately, Denise happened to be walking past my house at the exact moment Winston repeated it perfectly from the porch. She stopped dead in the street, looking absolutely horrified. Then she marched directly to my door, demanding I control my animal's language. At first, I honestly apologized because I understood the situation looked ridiculous. I explained Parrot's copy sounds automatically and promised I would work on redirecting his vocabulary. But Denise treated the situation like some kind of criminal offense. Within days, she filed formal HOA complaints claiming my bird created a hostile living environment, because a parrot repeated one rude sentence. Before this gets completely insane, make sure to like and subscribe to Karen's Stories daily, because what started as harmless parrot drama eventually turned into HOA meetings, neighborhood chaos, and one bird publicly humiliating Karen using her own rulebook. Now, here is the funny part. Winston actually loved attention. The more emotional somebody reacted, the more interested he became. So, naturally, Denise constantly yelling near my porch made Winston obsessed with copying her voice specifically. Soon, he started repeating things like, "This is unacceptable," and "I am calling the HOA immediately." In a perfect imitation of Denise's tone, neighbors could barely keep straight faces walking past my house. Meanwhile, Denise became more furious every week. She started documenting Winston's offenses with written logs. Report claimed emotional harassment through repeated bird sarcasm. Another claimed Winston mocked her walking style. I genuinely wish I was joking. Then the HOA sent me an official warning requesting I reduce disruptive vocal activity coming from my pet. That annoyed me because Winston stayed indoors most of the day, and honestly, several neighborhood dogs barked far louder than he ever did. Still, I tried being reasonable. I moved his perch farther from open windows. I covered sections of the porch during mornings. I even hired an animal behavior specialist who basically laughed after hearing the complaint. According to her, Winston behaved incredibly well for such an intelligent bird, but Denise would not stop. One afternoon, she stood outside my property recording Winston with her phone while deliberately provoking him. She repeated phrases loudly, hoping he would mimic something offensive. Instead, Winston looked directly at her and calmly said, "Please review Section 4, Paragraph 3. I nearly fell out of my chair laughing because somehow he had memorized part of an HOA discussion I played earlier that week that gave me an idea. If Denise wanted to obsess over HOA rules, then fine. Winston would become the neighborhood HOA expert. Over the next several weeks, I started casually reading HOA bylaws aloud while spending time near Winston's cage. And because African Greys are terrifyingly smart, he began memorizing entire phrases almost immediately. Parking restrictions, noise, rules board, voting procedures, landscape requirements, guest parking limitations. Soon, Winston could randomly quote regulations better than most homeowners. At first, it was harmless fun. Then Denise escalated everything again. She submitted a petition demanding exotic birds be banned entirely from the neighborhood because Winston allegedly created psychological distress. That proposal shocked a lot of residents because people generally liked Winston. Several neighbors openly defended him during meetings. Older couple even joked that Winston should replace half the HOA board because he knew more rules than they did. Denise hated that. During one especially tense HOA meeting, she stood up dramatically explaining how Winston represented ongoing harassment. Against her personally, and right in the middle of her speech, Winston, who sat quietly in a covered travel perch beside me, suddenly shouted in perfect clarity, Article 7. Subsection C requires written evidence for all complaints. Room exploded with laughter. Even board members struggled. Keeping serious faces, Denise turned bright red instantly, but Winston was just getting started, because once people laughed, he became excited, and excited parrots talk more. So, for the next several minutes, Winston continued randomly quoting HOA bylaws directly into the silence after Denise complained about something. Every single time she mentioned rules, Winston answered with another regulation. At one point, he shouted, "Improper enforcement. Procedures may invalidate penalties." I swear, one board member almost choked, trying not to laugh. The meeting completely collapsed into chaos. After that night, Winston basically became a neighborhood celebrity. Kids asked him to recite parking rules. Neighbors tested whether he knew random HOA policies. Somebody even jokingly called him the feathered attorney. Meanwhile, Denise absolutely lost her mind. She accused me of training Winston specifically to embarrass her publicly. And honestly, by that point, maybe she was partly right, because after months of nonstop harassment, I had stopped feeling sympathetic. The real disaster for Denise happened when Winston accidentally exposed something during another HOA meeting, something she definitely did not want residents hearing. And once that happened, the entire neighborhood started questioning everything she had been doing behind the scenes. During the next HOA meeting, Denise started arguing again about banning exotic pets from the neighborhood, gave this long dramatic speech about safety, respect, and community standards, while everyone sat there exhausted, listening to her complain. Then suddenly, Winston shouted in Denise's exact voice, "Just fine them anyway. Nobody reads the bylaws." Entire room went completely silent. People started looking around, confused, while Denise instantly turned pale. And honestly, I recognized the sentence immediately because Winston had copied it weeks earlier when Denise was talking privately outside, after a board meeting. One HOA member asked Denise what that statement meant. She tried laughing it off, but Winston kept repeating it over and over in perfect clarity. "Just fine them anyway. Nobody reads the bylaws." That was the moment several residents finally started questioning how many HOA fines were actually legitimate. Within days, people reviewed old violation notices and discovered Denise had pushed multiple penalties that technically violated HOA procedures. some homeowners were fined without proper warnings. Others received violations for rules that did not even exist officially. And suddenly, the woman who spent months attacking my parrot became the center of a huge HOA scandal. The board launched an internal review, and honestly, things collapsed fast after that. Several illegal fines were reversed. Residents demanded refunds, and Denise resigned from the HOA before the investigation even finished because public meetings had become brutal for her. Meanwhile, Winston became more popular than ever. Neighbors brought treats for him during walks, and kids loved hearing him randomly announce parking regulations like some tiny feathered lawyer. Even delivery drivers started asking if the HOA bird was home before dropping packages. Funny enough, Winston eventually stopped repeating rude phrases completely, but to this day he still randomly says HOA rules whenever somebody visits the house, and every single time I hear him calmly announce Article 7, subsection C, I. Remember how one angry Karen accidentally turned my parrot into the most respected resident in the neighborhood. If you enjoyed this story from Karen Stories Daily, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share this video, and tell me honestly, would your neighborhood survive living next to Winston the HOA parrot?